Chapter 18. Ashley lay stretched out on the giant air mattress, an inflatable island it was called. Her eyes were closed and her head was pillowed on a rolled towel while the sun warmed her skin. It had been a long time since she'd taken the time to relax like this. Jared lying beside her made it somehow easier to do nothing. Normally, she was always on the go. Something to be done, someone to see, some errand to run. But when Jared was there, all that need to get away, to do something was gone. All she needed was him. Movement made her open her eyes and look for him. There he was, up on his elbows, watching her. "What?" she asked. "You." Ashley frowned. She didn't know what he meant and wasn't sure how to respond. He leaned over and dropped a kiss on her cheek, and Ashley looked at him again. He covered her mouth in a hot kiss. Unable to resist, she rolled toward him, enjoying the press of his body along the length of hers. His hands roamed her body as hers did his. The world narrowed and soon, all that mattered was the two of them. The gentle rocking of the inflatable kept her aware they were in plain view on the water, so she made sure their swimsuits stayed in place, but that didn't stop the touching and heavy breathing. Later, as she lay covered in a fine sheen of sweat and gasping for breath, she watched Jared use the rope she'd tethered them to the dock with to pull them back to shore. She understood why he wanted to get back, she did too, but she didn't have the energy to help. She'd barely begun breathing normally again, when the island bumped into the dock. Ashley helped him gather their things, towels, blanket, and their cooler, and carry them inside. Once they'd dropped their burdens, she moved back to him, her arms curling around his neck as she pulled him down into a heated kiss. Out on the float, he'd taken the edge off her need, but she was far from done with him. Besides, he hadn't gotten the same release she had. His arms wrapped around her and pulled her against him. He lifted her until they were face to face, and moved into the kitchen until he could set her onto the counter, then his hands were free for other things. He tugged the string on her bikini top, freeing her breasts. Ashley moaned against his mouth as he palmed her boobs, squeezing them gently before kneading the full, aching flesh. She needed more. This wasn't enough. Her hands tugged at the waistband of his trunks. He pulled her hands away and lifted her again. She wrapped her arms around his neck to keep from falling as he carried her, but she was too engrossed in him to notice where he was taking her, and she was surprised when he set her on the arm of the sofa. His mouth covered hers in a searing kiss as his hand slid over her skin, leaving a trail of need in their wake. Jared broke the kiss and trailed his mouth along her skin, much like his hands had. "I love when you touch me," Ashley said. "Touching you is easy. Keeping my hands to myself is the hard part." Jared lingered for a few moments at her breasts, but kept moving down. He reached her belly button and pushed her back. She leaned back until she fell against the cushions, her hips still resting on the arm like an offering. He looked up to her face and gave her a satisfied smile. "This only makes you more tempting," he said, before kissing her belly and continuing along her body. Instead of sliding the bottom of her swimsuit down, he tugged the strings, untying each hip, then lifted the panel down. His fingers were gentle as he lowered his mouth over her, and blew cool air over her heated, wet core. Jared glanced up at her, then leaned close and ran his tongue down the length of her slit. Ashley moaned loudly and stretched for him but couldn't quite reach. Don't stop," she cried as he used his mouth and tongue to send her into a wordless scream as waves of pleasure washed through her body. Ashley didn't know how long it continued, only that she was hoarse and out of breath by the time Jared stood. "Are you ready?" He dropped his trunks. "Yes. God, yes," Ashley said, as Jared slowly pushed himself into her hot, tight tunnel. She ached to touch him, to pull him closer, hold him against her, anything. He started to withdraw, the urge to cry nearly overwhelmed her. She craved the full sensation of his body inside hers. "Jared!" She reached for him again. Clawed the air in her need to touch him. He took her hand, weaving his fingers with hers, and kept his other hand on her hip to hold her in place, as he continued to stroke in and out of her. Ashley clung to him, the sensation of his body inside her, his hand on her hip as the world started to dim and pleasure washed over her in waves. "Yes," Jared shouted and stiffened, holding himself deep inside her for a moment before relaxing. His head fell forward as he stood, leaning against the sofa, his breathing only ragged gasps. Ashley wasn't any better, despite his having done all the work. She was exhausted. A knock sounded on the door and they looked at each other a second, eyes wide. "Quick, into the bedroom and put something on. I'll see who it is." Jared pulled Ashley to her feet and yanked up his trunks from where they were pooled at his feet. Ashley scrambled into his bedroom. The door was almost closed when she heard his voice. "Mom? What are you doing here?" There was no mistaking the surprise in Jared's voice. "I came to check on you." His mother's voice was firm but polite. "I told you to give me a couple of weeks to get settled in." "I know, but you were hiding something this morning, and I needed to see for myself that you hadn't relapsed." Ashley quietly closed the door, yanked on her clothes, and checked her hair. Shit. One look at her and Jared's mom would know exactly what they'd been doing. Picking up a comb, she hurried to tame her tangled curls, at least a little. She only succeeded in making it frizz around her head. She debated water over her head, but decided to hell with it, and pulled it up into a messy bun before going back into the front room.